Last but not least, we still have perhaps one more presentation from our host, Dr. Mikhail Lobanov, who is, I think, here. Can you?
Yes, but
switch on? Okay. Before I give you the floor,
okay.
I would like to express the gratitude of the invited speakers and all the presenters and guests here for the excellent organization of this event. I do this right now because after your presentation, maybe we will have a few minutes time to some questions, but I really didn't want to forget about this. So Mikhail, thanks a lot. This was an excellent organization. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, but I should mention that it was a teamwork, the organization of this conference, and I would like to thank all the people that helped to organize the conference and set the strategic goals of the conference and help technically to share the information. So thank you, Mr. Sani, for the nice words. And unfortunately, I need to say that I can't switch on my camera because the internet here is very low, and I couldn't switch it on. I will try to share the screen, but I would like to ask you that if I just occasionally out of the conference, I will try to get back as soon as possible. So please stay with me. I hope that everything will be okay.
Okay, very good. We can hear you properly.
Okay, thank you. Here's my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. It's okay.
Great, thank you. I will speak about the industrial development of the countries of the region. I will speak, because presentation is quite long, I will try to skip some slides, but generally I will tackle a bit the problems of industrial dynamics, the problems, the role of industry in the economy of the countries, labor market, labor resources, foreign economic activity, and efficiency. As for dynamics, if we speak about dynamics, here we can split the recent history of industrial development of the countries into three periods: before the crisis, during the crisis, like double bottom, 2009 and 2012 and 13, the aftershock, and then after the crisis for 6 years. As first of all, we need to mention that the EU is lagging behind. Rapid growth in all of the countries of Central Eastern Europe and Southern Eastern Europe, except of Montenegro. You can see it here on the first graph, on the second graph. Dr. Valic already spoke about it, so I'll not spend time on the, I think it's like systemic crisis, systemic risk, and this risk doesn't perceive it by the local elites. As for the crisis, all of us know the situation with Poland, the Poland case, the capacious domestic market, a low exportability, and we can also mention some countries that didn't involve into a world economy, some countries like Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, that also didn't suffer from the crisis because of low inclusion into the processes. So they didn't have any channels to be poisoned by the crisis. It's interesting to mention that the European Union fell by 14%, Hungary in 2009 fell by 18%, so during the pandemic the decline could be greater. As for the third graph, here we can find that the crisis 2009 was not an overwhelming obstacle for industry. The rates are lower than before the crisis, but still the industry is growing. If we speak about the present day situation, the situation of 2020, I would like to compare the dynamics of GDP and the industry. As for GDP for 2 quarters of 2020, we need, first of all, to find out that the countries of the region had some inertia or lag GDP has declined for 2 quarters in a row only in Slovenia and Czech Republic. In many of Western countries, situation was completely different. Also, we can mention that it was a moderate decline compared to the European Union and compared to Spain and to Italy. I put it also on the slide to show you, to compare. And some countries generally could went to 0. Maybe we need to wait for the statistics for the third and for the fourth quarter, but still the situation is not so bad. As for some components of GDP, like household expenditures and gross fixed capital formation, here we also could see, for example, for household expenditures, a strong decline in Bulgaria and Czech Republic. And as for capital formation, there is some interesting points. First of all, multi-directional trends, Romania and Serbia on the one hand, and the rest on the other. But nice that nobody has reached the low level of Spain and Italy that fall 20–25% for the second quarter of 2020. As for employment, general employment and employment in the industry, total employment has dropped noticeably, but not only in the region. As you can see here, the labor force the employment dropped in Austria and Italy and in Germany also. That we can say that a labor force, as we all know, is returning to the home countries, like for the Balkans, in Serbia, in Bosnia, in Croatia, but the fact. Sorry. Oh, okay, so we can expect the growth in unemployment in the countries. First of all, in the Balkans. As for industry, the employment is industry. It's dire situation, as you can see in Hungary and Romania. 8% drop in Romania in the second quarter. Hungary, if you put the first and second quarter all together, all the drop is also very high. And some statistic is difficult to explain. For example, the situation in Croatia when employment in industry is on the positive side. If we speak about industrial production in 2019 and 2020, if we compare industry and some services. As for industry, it's a national statistic data. Industrial production began to decline from the second quarter, excluding Romania. As you can see, the crisis in Romania probably started before the pandemic, and pandemic just exaggerated the crisis. Poland is a familiar success story again. We'll see what has happened later, but generally it behaves better than the other countries of the region. If we speak about the total decline, as you know, some experts expect that the decline in the industry by the end of the year may reach 10, 15, or maybe 20%. That means that it could be more than during the crisis of 2009. And it's interesting that in industry, the situation is even worse than in trade, transport, hotel and restaurant business. So actually, I expected a little bit another situation. If we compare, for example, hotels and restaurants, food service activities, but maybe the 2020 crisis could be a real sector crisis at the end. The construction, for example, in general is growing in spite of everything. In the most of the countries, it's overwhelming for me. Construction is going up and the industry is going down. As for the role of the industry, very briefly, we put some indicators, the share in manufacturing in GDP for all of the countries. Try to find some conclusions on this change. Also, the share of industry in employment structure, the absolute figures dynamics in all of these countries. At the end, we concluded that probably we could make a kind of typology, like industrial development patterns. Definitely, we need to check it later using another statistics, but we could split all the countries into 4 groups. First group I call recurrent or repeated deindustrialization. That means that these countries, Poland, Hungary, and Romania, had a growth for many years, and now they have a decline. In Hungary, for example, the decline even in the absolute figures, industry decline in the absolute figures. The other group, persistent deindustrialization, Montenegro, Croatia, Serbia. For example, I can illustrate it here on the graph. Serbia, Croatia, and Montenegro. Montenegro is again example when the absolute figures and relative figures going down. We already spoke about it. Then the third group, reindustrialization. Reindustrialization on the wave of neo-industrialism in European Union. So post-crisis industrial renaissance. Everybody know about this communique from European Union. Industrial policy, national ones, supranational. So Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Slovenia probably has some visible signs of reindustrialization, which is, how to say, close to this policy, industrial policy of the European Union, could be explained by it. And the fourth group, secondary market industrialization. Why? All of these four countries had catastrophic decline in 90s. For example, in Bulgaria, industry dropped 6 times from 1990 to 1995. 6 times in 5 years. In all other countries of the group, the situation was nearly the same. So after this catastrophe, they started to make a framework of the industry like NU. So this framework of the industry was actually created in EU, in market conditions. So I call it secondary or market industrialization. Like all of these countries had pioneer socialist industrialization, now they could have secondary market industrialization, and we can follow it using the statistics. The share of industry growth in employment, in GDP, and absolute figures is growing. And it's interesting that this industrialization have nothing in common with industrial renaissance of the European Union. It started before, and probably European Union doesn't influence at all on the. As for labor markets, what had happened during the crisis of 2009? I split all the groups, our group, into 2 parts: Visegrad countries and countries of Southern Eastern Europe, and they differed a lot. As for labor market, employment in mining and manufacturing in general. For example, differences in the depths of the fall. As for Balkans, 25% was the fall. As for Visegrad countries, approximately 10. Just Slovakia fall like 17%. Generally, the depth of the fall was completely different. The duration of the recession was also different because in Central Eastern Europe, the minimum level of employment was in 2010, as you can see on the graph. So just 2 years of fall. If we speak about Balkan countries, the labor market was devastated by the crisis. For example, pre-crisis indicators already exceeded in Visegrad countries, already exceeded. As you can see the statistics for 2019 for Poland or Czech Republic or Hungary. If we speak about Bulgaria or Romania, for example, in 2019, there were 15 or 20% fewer jobs than before the crisis. So I think it's quite interesting to explore later what had happened to these biggest economies of Southern Eastern Europe. As for average personal cost and the salaries, because we speak a lot about backshoring, reverse relocation, normal relocation like reshoring, about the differences in the level of labor costs in the West and in the East. And it was interesting to study, is there any convergence? What about the competitive advantage? And the situation is like this. The gap between the European Union and most of the countries remains, except for Slovenia, for salaries. For example, Slovenian salaries nearly 5 times more than in Bulgaria. So the group of Central Eastern countries are very heterogeneous. And it's interesting that the salary gap between, for example, Balkans and the European Union has not been overcome. You can see, for example, compare the statistics for Bosnia and Herzegovina or for Croatia, the costs and the wages, and for European Union in general. So I will not lose the time for this slide only, but it's interesting that we can speak only about the convergence of labor costs for some industries, individual industries. Maybe if you study textile or some machinery, we'll find this convergence, but generally it didn't happen. As for foreign activity and the dependence on the markets, Professor Inotai already told us about the dependence on traditional markets. It is very difficult for the countries of the region to reorient it to another markets, to third markets. If we compare the share of European Union before the crisis and after the crisis, now in 2019, we will find out that the dependence increasing, except for Slovenia. And it's interesting that all of our countries are the top countries concerning the EU share in trade. Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, they're just after the Luxembourg. So the prognosis, the forecasts for diversification after the crisis have remained only on the paper, not realized. Our economy is very dependent. It's very dependent on the foreign capital, and all of us know that the level of influence of foreign companies is the highest in the European Union, just after the island. Slovak Republic, Hungary, they have extremely high dependence in production and in employment, as you can see here on the graph. Compared to the relatively small Austrian market, the region's transnationalization is impressive. Even in the Slovenian fortress of protectionism, there is a noticeable increase. In Croatia, look at Slovenia and compare it to Austria. What was before the crisis and what had happened now in 10 years after the crisis. So I would say that this dependent onto the foreign capital is growing, even in the country that was not on the first in the list. And I have only, I think, 3 slides before I will finish. We also studied the situation with the prospects for integration into global production chains, of prospects for the readiness for the fourth industrial revolution. We know that these markets is characterized by low absorption capacity. And because of low absorption capacity, we can speak about spillover effects in case of innovation. Also, the diffusion of innovations does not affect export platforms. And we speak about Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland as for export platforms. Export platforms doesn't need innovation generally. But actually, I would say that the situation with technologically intense production is better than we could expect, because it's interesting that most of the Visegrad countries, they grew before the crisis. If we speak about the high-tech exports, look at Hungary, look at Slovakia, Czech Republic. So they stopped a bit because 75% is a very, very, very high level of technologically intensive exports. It's comparable only for Germany, as you know. Hungary and Slovakia and Czech Republic is comparable only for Germany. But it's interesting that Balkan countries is also growing after the crisis. So, for example, you can notice the situation in Bulgaria, in Serbia, in Macedonia, in Romania. The only example of not positive example is Bosnia-Herzegovina, and definitely Albania. The situation is getting worse in Albania. As for labor productivity in manufacturing of the countries, if we compare the growth of labor productivity in the European Union and in our countries and compare it to the wages, we will find out that productivity grows faster than salaries everywhere except Romania. It's interesting. Maybe it is caused by the immigration from Romania that caused the labor shortage. and outstripping wage growth. But not all countries close the gap in comparison to the EU in terms of labor productivity. And growth rates are slower than the EU average. It's also an interesting point because we speak about the labor productivity and the prospects of these countries to close this gap. And you can compare the situation in the European Union and, for example, in Poland or in Croatia, for example. And the situation is not so good. And the final slide of my presentation, I just wanted to compare, to find the relationship between labor productivity and the share of foreign companies, because I do not deal with the econometrics. I'm not the economist, I'm an economic geographer, so maybe it's a bit simple model, I would say, but I try to make a kind of scatter plots for the all European countries, A, B for 12 countries of the region, and C, 11 countries of the region, excluding Slovenia. And probably we can think that it's a positive correlations for the countries of the region. And when we asked how does the attraction of foreigners affect labor productivity, maybe it can be argued that the factor that increased productivity are mostly exogenous, not endogenous. If we speak about the countries of our region, because the dynamics is completely different from the dynamics of the European Union in general. So we speak about, again, the imitation model, the exogenous factor that influence more than internal factors. And probably, yes, our region are still use the same model of development, dependent market economy, which rely mostly on the imitation model for innovation attraction and attraction of capital from abroad. Thank you very much. I'm really very sorry if I spoke more than 15 minutes.
No, it was, I think, precise. The time went earlier